Happy President's Day. Welcome to Send It In, presented by BetMGM here on the BetMGM network. Hope everybody's having a great off day. If you're watching us on your off day from work, or if you're working like us, appreciate you tuning in. We got a great episode of Send It In coming up over the next 30 minutes. Our guy Johnny V going to join us to talk about college baseball, what he saw in the opening weekend. Also going to look at the NBA second half of the season. We had the All-Star game last night. Going to look at some NBA futures. We will continue our MLB previews as we continue looking at the NL Central. We talked about the Cincinnati Reds on Friday. Today we look at the Milwaukee Brewers. And then it is a Monday, so we will look at my top 10 teams in college basketball. Obviously, we had Auburn and Alabama, number 1 versus number 2. Auburn won that game. They are the clear winner to win the national championship, the clear favorite, I should say. So we will break down the top 10 in college hoops. As always, any questions, any comments, best bets that you guys have for us, let us know. You can follow us at the BetMGM Network on Twitch, on Twitter, YouTube. Send in anything that you guys have. And if you miss any part of the show over the next 30 minutes, make sure you check us out on the Send It In podcast, available wherever you get your podcast. Glasses in session. Let's get rolling here on a Monday. We go to the Glasser guest line, check in with Johnny Venezia, give him a follow on X @_JohnnyVTV, host of the Breaking Bet podcast. Johnny, we had you on last Monday to preview the college baseball season. You gave us a lot of great stuff. Now that you've actually seen these teams play, let's talk about what you saw over the weekend. And let's start with the team that you thought was the most impressive over the last 3 days.
Paige, we're finally back. It was a fantastic weekend. And listen, it's hard because there was a lot of teams that impressed me, so I have a few. Let's start with Arizona State, my preseason Big 12 winner. Fantastic offense. They scored 33 runs in their sweep of Ohio State. Brandon Compton was fantastic. 2 home runs, 5 for 10 this weekend, 7 RBIs. So I love ASU this year. If their pitching can get under control a little bit in the bullpen, I think they're going to be a really, really interesting dark horse this year. Texas A&M looked like every bit of that number 1 preseason team. They were off the hook in their sweep of Elon, who's a tough mid-major. Lineup is deep. The rotation looked fantastic, all lefty rotation with Ryan Prager, Justin Lampkin, and Miles Patton transfer from Long Beach State. And how about the Texas Longhorns? Transition into the SEC. They had a tough weekend with the Shriners Classic baseball tournament down in Arlington. Their 1-2 punch, brand new. Jared Spencer, Indiana State transfer, was sensational on Friday versus Louisville. And Luke Harrison, new starter on Saturday, was fantastic as well against Ole Miss. The offense looked dangerous. It was a great weekend. A lot of teams showed out, but those 3 stood out to me the most.
What about on the other side, Johnny? Give me a couple teams that you thought were the most disappointing over the weekend.
Let's go to the other Arizona team. The Arizona Wildcats got swept in that same Shriners Classic. They got run-ruled by Louisville yesterday. Their offense looked atrocious, which is bad news considering they have Brendan Summerhill, a potential top 10 prospect this summer, and Mason White at shortstop. He did homer twice, but otherwise not really much to speak of. This offense was absolutely atrocious. Outside of one big inning on Saturday, where they had a grand slam from Summerhill, they only scored 3 runs this weekend. It was not good. Their pitching was bad outside of freshman Smith Bailey, who looked fantastic yesterday, 4 shutout innings. So I was really not pleased with Arizona baseball. Could be a long year for them. And Duke was not a team I was very high on coming into this year. I thought there was some regression. And Cincinnati was an upset pick I had this weekend that was going to give them some trouble. And Cincinnati took the series at Duke opening weekend, and they put up 20 runs against the Blue Devils yesterday. So 2 teams that were not very good for me opening weekend.
Johnny, on last Monday, you gave us some of your Golden Spikes players. You gave us 3 guys that you thought were to watch out coming into the season. What players stood out to you from opening weekend that caught your eye?
Let's start out with one of my key 3 Golden Spikes guys. Max Bailu from Texas was absolutely fantastic this week and went 8 for 14 with 2 home runs, 5 RBIs, 2 hits at least in every game. He hit an absolute frozen rope home run to dead center in the ballpark of Arlington yesterday. That ball was 430 feet to dead center on a line drive. Fantastic start for Bailu. I think he's going to be a monster for Texas this year. First-round pick this summer. Next is Merrick Houston for Wake Forest. Top 5 shortstop prospect. 10 for 14 with 3 home runs and 13 RBIs in 4 games this weekend. Merrick Houston's stock is soaring. He was good in his first 2 years, but he might have turned a corner and might have a very, very big year and prove why he should be a first rounder this summer. Last but not least, Jace Lavalette, preseason #1 pick, showed out 3 for 10, 3 monster home runs, 7 RBIs. Jace Lavalette had 29 home runs last year. The 3 he put on this weekend looks like he's going to be a 30-plus home run guy. This kid is the college Matt Olson. Absolute freak, lived up to that preseason hype so far.
Johnny, LSU jumped up to plus 800 off BetMGM with A&M, with Tennessee. We talked about Virginia and, obviously the expectations that they have coming into this season last week. Do you feel like LSU, you saw enough from them to be on the tier of Tennessee and A&M, or do you still think the Vols and the Aggies are kind of in a tier of their own this early on in the season?
No, LSU was in my preseason tier 1. I have national championship expectations for this team. The pitching is disgusting. It's loaded. They're 8 arms deep. Their offense is loaded. They brought in 3 top 10 freshmen for the class of 2027. They brought in a couple transfers. My boy Chase Shores pitched yesterday in his return. 2 years since he's taken the mound off of Tommy John. I expect him to be a first rounder this summer. This is the guy I believe might not only be a first rounder, but could potentially be the first pitcher off the board. By the way, in a cold weather LSU game yesterday, Chase Shores touched 99. This kid is an absolute freak in five innings, 1 earned, 7 strikeouts. I expect LSU to be an absolute force this year. They looked fantastic this weekend.
Virginia, who I was talking about, Johnny, plus 900 last week. They go up to 12-1. So clearly, if you like Virginia coming into the season, get a little more value on the Cavaliers. Was there anybody that you added to your futures portfolio? Maybe it was a Golden Spikes winner. Maybe it was a national championship future. Maybe it was a conference title from one of these teams. After watching this weekend, did you add anything betting-wise to the futures portfolio?
Yeah, it's interesting. UNC, the Tar Heels, were a team I was very high on, along with Virginia. They were my bet for the ACC, 2-unit plays each way. UNC, while all these other top teams had a lot of layup matchups, UNC had a tough out with Texas Tech in the opening weekend series, but their pitching looked fantastic. They only allowed 6 runs all weekend against a capable Red Raiders offense. Their pitching is deep, led by Jason DeCaro, a guy who's going to be a top 5 pitcher off the board next summer. They retooled their offense after losing Vance Honeycutt, a guy who I believe was the best overall college baseball player last year. The team is dangerous. Once again, Scott Forbes has got this group ready to go. There's 24-1 out there on UNC, which is nuts considering there's 15-1 or less pretty much everywhere else. So I definitely feel like taking a piece of UNC at their price is a must right now. UNC is going to be a dangerous team. They're at the very top of my tier 2 group for this year.
Baltimore Oriole Vance Honeycutt, Johnny. Excited to see him in Camden Yards in a couple of years. Before we let you go, obviously got to get your thoughts on any plays that you like tonight in college baseball. What has your eye?
So I expect a lot of these games to be high scoring. Sundays are always historically a big over day because the bullpens are gassed and the starting pitchers typically aren't very good for most teams on Sundays. So I expect a lot of high scoring matchups today, but I went with one play. It's Monday. These teams have been on the end of a long weekend. So I liked a little parlay with Arkansas, Oregon State, and Coastal Carolina. Advantage matchups across the board. Arkansas is going with Landon Beidelshees, the Ohio State Friday night guy from last year. He's their 4th starter. That is absurd. So I think Arkansas against Wazoo can handle business. Oregon State's offense exploded this weekend. They have a lot of stars. Avo Arquette from Washington, who's going to be a first-rounder this year. Trent Caraway, who's going to be a first-rounder this year. Gavin Turley, just loads of talent. And Coastal Carolina, one thing we know about Coastal, they can score in their own building. They're going against Kansas State, who lost to Washington opening day. Kansas State's pitching is not very deep. Coastal Carolina, the one thing we know they do is put up runs, so I expect them to do the same thing. You can get that parlay at plus 147.
There you go. Johnny Venezia. Make sure you guys follow him on X at _JohnnyVTV, host of the Breaking Bet podcast. Joins us here on Mondays, college baseball season. Nobody better. Johnny, good luck to you today, sir. We'll talk again next week.
Thank you so much, Peach. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right, guys, let's keep it rolling. Talking about our MLB previews of the 2025 season in the NL Central. We talked about the Cincinnati Reds on Friday. Let's dive into the Milwaukee Brewers today. And Brewers are an interesting team. I've always kind of thought the Brewers are like the NL version of the Tampa Bay Rays a little bit, right? Not a big market, not a big payroll, no real big superstars. They're never on national television. But like year in and year out, this team is constantly competing for division titles. They're normally always in the postseason. And even though on paper their roster doesn't look as great as some of the teams in their division or some of the teams in the National League, the Brewers are pretty much good for either 90 wins, high 80 wins every single year. Now this year might be a tougher year for Milwaukee. Their win total's at 82.5. The over is minus 120 and the under is plus 100. Really the big move that the Brewers made this offseason was trading Devin Williams, their star closer, away for Nestor Cortez, a couple of prospects to the New York Yankees. So Nestor's going to be the third starter for Milwaukee. They still have Freddie Peralta. They're going to have Brandon Woodruff coming back from injuries. Probably not going to be on the opening day roster, but I would expect him to see him maybe like late April, possibly early May. So the Brewers pitching is always good. And even losing Devin Williams to their bullpen, adding Nestor Cortez, Brewers once again should be really good. Where I see the value in Milwaukee this year is their superstar outfielder, Jackson Chourio. I think this is the guy that we target. I necessarily don't like team futures with Milwaukee this year. The win total, as I mentioned, is 82.5. For them to win the NL Central is plus 250. All the hype around the Cubs and all the moves that they've made this offseason, certainly trading for Kyle Tucker. The Cardinals are a great organization. You would expect them to bounce back and have a good season, even though they lost Goldschmidt. You look at the Pittsburgh Pirates, obviously with Paul Skeens, maybe people expecting them to get better and better. And then the Cincinnati Reds, we talked about them on Friday, burst onto the scene with Ellie De La Cruz a couple of years ago. Last year, disappointing season. Maybe they kind of pick it back up again. So it feels like maybe this could be a little bit of a down year for Milwaukee. I think you're seeing that reflected in the win total, the fact that they are plus 250 to win the division. But again, I think Chourio, he's the value this season because this dude has superstar potential. Came in last year as one of the highly touted prospects in all of baseball. He was putting up numbers comparable to Ronald Acuna Jr. in the minor leagues. He got off to a little bit of a slow start, but then found his own on the at the end. He's 35-1 to win NL MVP. And look, there are a lot of great players on the Dodgers, on the Braves, on the Phillies. Soto's on the Mets now. Like, there are a lot of great players in the National League. Chourio's upside, though, I think it's worth a bet because if he's as good as what a lot of people think he is going to be in his career and what a lot of people thought he was going to be when he was in the minor leagues, this might be the best price we get on Jackson Chourio in a while. So the upside, he's a five-tool player. He's an incredible athlete. He's a great hitter, all these things. I think he's the guy that I would target. 35-1 to win NL MVP. I do think there's some potential value there. And again, I like the fact that the Brewers win total is at 82.5. So if they exceed expectation yet again, if they somehow are a 90-win baseball team, Chourio's in the middle of it, even though he does play in Milwaukee and he's not going to get the recognition of a player on the Phillies, on the Mets, on the Dodgers, I think Chourio has a chance to have a big season where he could put himself into that conversation. So 35-1 Jackson Chourio, NL MVP, I think is a pretty decent bet. Our guy Shawnee Sharp found a great prop bet on BetMGM that I think is really awesome too. So three of the youngest stars in baseball, Jackson Chourio, Jackson Merrill off of the Padres, and Jackson Holliday off of the Orioles, obviously are all named Jackson. Well, our friends at BetMGM put out a fun prop bet that you can take one of these three guys to have the most hits of the Jacksons this season. Chourio's the favorite at plus 120, Merrill's at plus 135, and Jackson Holliday is plus 550. I think Holliday being certainly the highest odds makes a lot of sense. He doesn't have nearly as many at-bats as Merrill or Chourio does. He's a left-handed hitter like Merrill, but because of his manager, Brandon Hyde, Holliday sometimes is a platoon type guy. So later in the game, when Brandon Hyde, the Orioles manager, sees that there's a left-handed reliever coming in, a lot of the times any of the Orioles left-handed hitters that's really not Gunnar Henderson, maybe Colton Cowser, Brandon Hyde is going to pinch hit those guys. So because Brandon Hyde is the manager of the Orioles, and I don't see him changing his ways, even though Jackson has obviously been the number one prospect in baseball for a couple of years, I think he's got a really bright future. That's just the way that Brandon Hyde manages. So I really can't trust Jackson to get as many opportunities, Jackson Holiday, as a Chourio or a Merrill. So I think it comes down to those two guys. Merrill's an awesome player. He's a great hitter. He had an unbelievable year this past season. Obviously, NL Rookie of the Year conversation with Paul Skeens. But I think Chourio is the guy at plus 120. I'm really expecting a big year out of him. Because he plays in Milwaukee, I think we're kind of forgetting about him, and we forget the superstar potential that this guy possesses. I think we could be reminded of that this season. So give me Jackson Chourio of this fun prop bet between the Jacksons to lead them in hitting at plus 120, and then give me Jackson Chourio a little sprinkle, 35-1 to win NL MVP at 35-1. All right, let's talk some NBA futures now as we go off the glass here on Send It In. Obviously, had NBA All-Star Weekend this past weekend, which once again was a big topic of discussion. The slam dunk contest, Mac McClung, once again, fantastic, three-time champion. But the All-Star game last night, I mean, this is what it's come to. This is what we've come to expect out of the NBA All-Star game. Thankfully, we get NBA basketball coming back in a couple days, and the season is going to start to ramp up until we finally get in the playoffs. We thought it'd be a good time to look at some NBA futures as we head in to the second half of the season. We'll start with the NBA Eastern Conference because I don't think there's going to be as much parity in the East as what I believe we're going to see in the Western Conference. Boston is the favorite, and rightfully so, at minus 115, followed by Cleveland at plus 300, and the Knicks at plus 500. Then you got to go down to Giannis and the Bucks at 13-1. I really do feel like it's going to be one of the top three teams. I don't think that's going out on a limb and saying a lot. Now that the Bucks have Kuzma, is that really even an upgrade from Chris Middleton? Yes, you have Dame and Giannis. Do you trust those two guys to both stay healthy? Even if they do, is that going to be enough to take down one of these other teams? Possibly Cleveland, maybe the Knicks. I don't think they can beat Boston, though. Really no interest in Milwaukee. The Knicks, look, this is why they went all in. This is why they traded so much for Bridges. This is why they traded so much for Karl Anthony Towns. They don't really care about the depth of their team. They just want a great starting five and the five best players that they can have that gives them the best chance to beat the Boston Celtics. And we know with Tibbs as their head coach, he's going to run these guys into the ground, especially when they get into the playoffs. Expect to see all their starters play easily 40-plus minutes every single night. I just don't really trust the Knicks. We saw the injuries catch up with them in the playoffs last year, and they just don't really have much room for error. If one of their players gets into foul trouble, if one of their players has a lingering injury, yes, Deuce McBride comes off the bench, Precious Achiuwa, they have some guys, but really, it's those five starters, Brunson, Bridges, Hart, Anunoby, and Towns. Those are the five guys that the Knicks rely on. I just think it's putting too much pressure on those guys. And to be honest with you, even if they stay healthy, I really don't like them to beat Boston. Maybe Cleveland, but I don't like them to beat Boston. So I'm out on the Knicks. The Cavs are obviously having an incredible year. And we see this a lot in the NBA with a team that's awesome in the regular season. And then we get to the playoffs and it's just not the same team. I kind of fear that with the Cavaliers. We've seen for a bunch of years now what happens when Donovan Mitchell is your number one guy going into a playoff series, and it just doesn't work out for you. He's never been to a conference final before. So even though he's still really good, Garland's having an all-star year, Mobley, they trade for DeAndre Hunter, Kenny Atkinson's a great coach. Cleveland's a good defensive team. They have good depth. I just think with Donovan Mitchell as your number one, I can't bet you to go to the NBA Finals. So for me, it's the Boston Celtics. I know they've had some bumps in the road, but when you combine experience, talent, and depth, Boston checks all three of those boxes more so than any of the other teams in the East. The Western Conference, though, is where I think it gets interesting. To be honest with you guys, I think it's kind of crazy that the Thunder are this big of a favorite over the Denver Nuggets. Right now, OKC plus 105 to win the West. Denver is plus 650. I get that OKC is awesome. SGA is going to win MVP. They've been building towards this the last couple of years. Defensively, they're fantastic. This group of Thunder, though, have never been to the Western Conference Final. And not only are they favored to do so, they are the resounding favorite. It's much like the Cavs and the Knicks. Like, those core teams haven't even been to a conference final before. Yeah, they're big underdogs behind Boston, but I feel like the odds should be about the same in both conferences. And the fact that the Nuggets are so much farther down than OKC, I just think is crazy. Jokic is still the best player in the world. Jamal Murray's been good. Michael Porter's been good. Christian Braun stepped up. Russell Westbrook's been awesome for Denver as well. They got the playoff experience. They know how to win that time of year. I think the value is on Denver in the Western Conference. I just think OKC at this number, I think, is way too high. So I like the Nuggets quite a bit. The Lakers are interesting at plus 700. I think if the Lakers get matched up with Denver, it would be a nightmare for them because they already couldn't beat Denver with Jokic, and that was with Anthony Davis, and now they don't even really have a big man. I think Jokic would go crazy. He'd have a field day on the Lakers with them having no front court presence. So maybe if they played OKC in the semifinals in the West, maybe they'd have a chance. I still don't think they beat Oklahoma City, but if they played Denver, I would not like the Lakers in that matchup. The Grizzlies have a really good team. The problem is they have 11 guys averaging around 20 minutes per game, and Taylor Jenkins is going to have to find a way to kind of shorten his rotations. We saw that a lot with OKC in the playoffs last year and kind of how that can throw the team off the game. I also worry about their outside shooting a little bit, so I just think Memphis almost has too much depth for a team getting to the postseason. Guys, I like the Nuggets. A lot of people thought we were going to get Nuggets Celtics last year. I kind of think we're going to get that this year in the NBA Finals. I like Boston to go back-to-back, but I think the value is on the Denver Nuggets to win the West at plus 650. All right, let's talk some college basketball as we look at our top 10 teams. And we got some shuffling in the top 10 this week. We also got some shuffling in the odds market at BetMGM, and that's because Auburn won the number 1 versus number 2 showdown. They jumped from plus 400 all the way up to plus 325 to win the national title, and I think rightfully so. Auburn proved that they are the best team in college basketball on Saturday. My biggest takeaway from that game was how good their perimeter defense is. Pettiford, Denver Jones, Baker Mazzara, Chaney Johnson. Bama's a really tough team to defend. Their spacing, the sets that they run, how good their guards are one-on-one, and Auburn, for much of the game, did a great job keeping them in front. They also forced Bama to shoot the ball 5 for 26 from three-point range. So Auburn's schedule has been the toughest in college basketball. They're 23-2 this season. They haven't lost a game on the road in the SEC. They are the rightful favorites to win the national championship. With all that being said, please do not bet Auburn at this price to win the national championship. You are getting in at the buy low at the sell high point for Auburn because everybody just watched them win that massive game against Bama, and I think now everybody's kind of sold on Auburn, right? Like, it's natural. You watch number 1 play number 2, number 1 wins on the road, and you're like, man, I don't know if anybody's beaten Auburn. Well, that's why their odds have gone from plus 400 to plus 325. So don't bet Auburn right now if you like them, because remember, the SEC is a really good league. There's a good chance Auburn's probably going to drop another game, if not 2 more. So wait and see if you can get a better number on Auburn if you do like them to win the title. That brings us to Duke as the number 2 team. I mean, look, the Blue Devils are top 5 in Ken Pom offense and defensive efficiency. On paper, I mean, it's ridiculous how good they are. My problems with Duke are that they're not going to get challenged much in the regular season. They're 1-3 in games decided by 6 points or less. There are going to be games in the tournament because of how Duke tends to struggle a little bit on offense, and they can play some lower scoring games where they're going to have some games that are close in the final 4 or 5 minutes. Duke has not been good in those situations so far this year, and when we get to March, how are they going to handle that? But that's why I have Auburn 1 and Duke at number 2. Florida's going to be the number 3 team for me at plus 900. Makes their Auburn win look even that much more impressive after watching Auburn beat Bama. Florida's loaded, man. They got great guards. They have good big men. Offense is solid. Defense is great. They're top 10 in both categories. Florida Gators absolutely good enough to win the national championship. I'll put Houston at number 4. They're plus 900 to win the whole thing. Houston with a great road win at Arizona on Saturday. Their defense continues to be fantastic. My thing with Houston is they obviously, like Duke, they tend to play some lower scoring games. Not as much as Duke, but both teams play lower scoring games. And that's dangerous when you get into March and you play low-scoring games like that. And I think that's why we've seen Houston get upset so many times, is because when you're built to play like they are and play games in the 60s, man, all the pressure is on you when you get into March. So Houston better hope they found a way to win all these tight games and these close games down the stretch.
But I still just can't get there with Houston, because unless it's a magical year like that Virginia team that finally won the whole thing where everything broke their way, I just don't think Houston's going to have enough to win the national title this year. Give me Bama as my number 5 team at 11-1. Bama drops from 9-1 to 11-1. If you're like, ooh, now I'm getting good value on Bama after they lost to Auburn, I would hold off. Their final 6 games of the regular season are all against ranked teams. Their final 3 games of the regular season are all against top 5 teams. So Bama's going to lose some more games. They're probably going to lose at least 2 more games, maybe even more. So just keep waiting on Bama if you still like them. I think what would encourage me about the Tide is the fact that they went 5 for 26 from 3-point range, and that was still a tied game with 7 minutes to go. So Bama is going to have some games in the tournament where they're not going to make their 3-pointers, and that's going to be the big question. When they have that off shooting night, can they find ways to win games? They won't be able to do it against teams like Auburn or Duke or Florida, but they can do it against a bunch of teams in the country. I'll put Bama at number 5. Iowa State's going to be number 6 for me. They're 16-1 to win the title. Momcilovic is back for Iowa State. That's a big deal. And the more and more I think about it, I'm coming around on the Cyclones. This was a team that was great to start the year, suffered some injuries, went through a little bit of a rut, but now they're starting to find themselves again. Iowa State, dangerous team. Texas A&M, I'll put them at number 7. They are 40-1 to win the national title. This A&M's team is so good on defense. They're such a good rebounding team. It comes down to free throws and 3-pointers for the Aggies. If they're able to hit shots in March, this team is good enough to beat anybody in the sport. Texas Tech, I'll put them right behind the Aggies at 35-1. Their point guard, Chance McMillan, is the whole key. He goes as they go. When he makes 3-pointers, this is a different team. So if you're a believer in McMillan, then you should be a believer in Texas Tech. It's a really good team. Number 9, I'll put St. John's at 35-1. St. John's really struggles at times offensively, but they got the number 2 defense in college basketball, and they got Rick Pitino as their head coach. They remind me a lot of that San Diego State team from a couple of years ago that made it all the way to the national championship game. I don't know if the Johnnies can win the whole thing because of their offense, but certainly can get to the Final Four. And then my number 10 team in college basketball, it's not Tennessee, it's not Wisconsin, it's not Michigan. I'm going with the Maryland Terrapins. It's 60-1. Maryland is one of 6 teams in college basketball that is top 20 in offense and defensive efficiency. 3 of those teams are the top 3 teams according to Ken Pom. Maryland is good enough to go to the Final Four. They really are. I'm not a fan of their head coach, Kevin Willard. I think ultimately that's what holds them back. But from a talent standpoint, the way that they can score and the way that they can shoot threes, and they got a superstar in freshman Derek Queen. Talking a lot about the Big Ten and maybe who to watch out for. Maryland, number 10 team for me at 60-1. All right, folks, let's wrap up the show. PJ's plays here on Send It In. And we will start with our prop lock of the day. We got the 4 nations going on tonight. Canada, Finland, and U.S. and Sweden. Remember, the U.S. has already clinched their spot into the championship game. So no Connor Hellebuck tonight. You know, they're certainly going to change things up with their lines and maybe not play certain guys as much. I'm going to go with Jack Eichel, though, to score a goal tonight against Sweden at plus 240. I like that price for Eichel. I don't want to bet the game again because the U.S. already has the championship game spot clinched, but I will take Eichel to score a goal at plus 240. My dog of the day, boy, this is a degenerate bet here on a Monday. We're going with East Texas A&M plus 4.5 against Stephen F. Austin. Why, might you ask? Well, I'm so glad you did. East Texas A&M is 3-23 this season. They are 1-14 in conference play. Yet here they are as just 4.5-point favorites. I think it's what we call a market indicator, folks. I think that line's telling you something. So we'll hold our nose and we'll take East Texas A&M 3-23 on the season, yet they're only 4.5-point dogs to cover the spread. And then finally, my best bet of the night is going to be Arizona first half plus a half against Baylor at minus 115. One of those unranked home teams in Baylor favored over a ranked team. Arizona looking to prevent a 3-game losing streak. Don't want to touch the full game, but I like the Wildcats to get off to a hot start. We'll take Zona in the first half. Thanks again to Johnny VTV for joining us today on the show. I'm going to be on You Better You Bet with Ryan Horvat 3 to 7. I'll see you guys then, and I'll see you tomorrow for some more Send It In.